In 1878, they finished the longest bridge on Earth. 2 miles of iron laid straight across the sea at a place in Scotland where the River Tay meets the tide. It was the pride of the age. The Queen herself crossed it and knighted the man who built it. If the bridge was long enough to break records, then the bridge was strong enough to trust. 18 months later, on the night after Christmas, a winter gale came up the Firth, and a train went out onto the high middle of the bridge in the dark. The signalman watched its tail lamps move out over the water, and then, at about 7:15, the lamps were gone, and so was the middle of the bridge. The whole center span had fallen into the Tay, and taken the train with it. Everyone aboard drowned in the dark, in the cold. At least 59 of them. No one ever knew the true number. This is the Tay Bridge, and this is how the longest bridge in the world killed a trainload of people, because one trusted man decided the wind did not matter. By the 1870s, the railways had crossed almost everything in Britain but the wide sea inlets of the east coast. At Dundee, the Firth of Tay was 2 miles of open water in the way of the line north. The man who promised to close that gap was Thomas Bouch, one of the most celebrated railway engineers in the country, known for building long and building cheap. His bridge would be a single line of iron carried on tall columns, nearly 2 miles from shore to shore, longer than anything the world had built. It opened in 1878, and the trains began to run. The next year, Queen Victoria rode across it in her royal train, and afterwards she made Thomas Bouch a knight. He was at the summit of his profession, already drawing an even greater bridge across the Firth of Forth. And because he was Sir Thomas Bouch, the man who built the longest bridge on Earth, very few people asked hard questions about how he had built it. In the middle of the Firth, where the water was deep enough for ships, the bridge had to rise up. For 13 spans across the navigation channel, the track ran not on top of the girders, but inside them, high above the sea. These were the high girders, the tallest, most exposed part of the whole bridge, a wall of iron standing broadside to whatever weather came up the open Firth. They stood on slender cast iron columns, braced together by thin wrought iron bars pinned into the castings. It looked light, it looked elegant. Under the right load, it was neat. A bridge 2 miles long across open water has one great enemy, and it is not the trains, it is the wind. A gale blowing across the side of a bridge pushes on it like a hand on a sail. The taller and the more exposed the structure, the harder that push, and the stronger the bracing has to be to stand against it. Thomas Bouch made almost no allowance for it. He designed the Tay Bridge to resist a wind pressure of about 10 pounds on the square foot, on advice he took as settled. He did not test it. He did not build in a margin. He assumed the wind would be gentle. After the disaster, engineers set the standard a British bridge must survive at 56 pounds on the square foot, more than 5 times what Bouch had built for. The margin that should have been there was simply missing. There was a second weakness hidden inside the iron itself, and it was not the iron. When the wreckage was tested later, the metal proved sound enough. The failure was in how the pieces were joined. The bracing bars were fastened to lugs, small ears of iron cast as part of each column. Those lugs were too light for the work, and they were badly made. The bolt holes were cast in a cone shape instead of straight, so a bolt bore against a thin edge instead of a flat face. And where the casting came out flawed, the foundry hid the flaw. They filled the blowholes with a paste of beeswax and iron filings, smoothed and painted over so a weak casting looked like a sound one. The men on the bridge could not have seen it, neither could Bouch. So the strength that was supposed to hold the high girders steady in a gale was resting on small, overworked castings, some of them cracked from the day they were made. None of this was a secret disaster waiting quietly. The bridge told on itself for months. The bracing bars worked loose and rattled. People spoke of the high girders chattering as trains went through. The man sent to inspect the bridge was a bricklayer, not an engineer, and he tightened what bars he could reach. There was a speed limit of 25 miles an hour on the bridge. Drivers routinely broke it, running at 40 and more through the high girders, and passengers felt the whole structure tremble as they passed. Each gale strained the bridge a little more. Each fast train shook it a little further. The bridge was being loosened, night by night, and everyone had decided to live with it. Sunday, the 28th of December, 1879, a violent winter storm was driving straight up the Firth of Tay, hitting the bridge full on its exposed side. It was one of the worst gales in living memory on that coast. The wind came in gusts strong enough to knock a man down, screaming across 2 miles of open water at the wall of the high girders. At about 7 o'clock in the evening, in the full dark and the driving rain, the mail train from Burnt Island came up the south side of the Firth toward the bridge, carrying its passengers home. It stopped at the south signal cabin, as every train did, to take the single-line staff that gave it the bridge. The signalman handed it up and watched the train move off onto the iron. It was the last time anyone would see that train whole. The signalman and his friend stood in the cabin and watched the 3 red tail lamps of the train move slowly out along the bridge, growing smaller until they went in among the high girders in the middle of the Firth. The wind was so strong now that the cabin itself was shaking. They watched the little lights out over the deep water, and they waited for them to come out the far side. And then there was a sudden burst of light out on the bridge, a bright flash low over the water, there and gone. When they looked again, the tail lamps were gone. There was nothing on the bridge at all, only the dark, and the wind, and the sound of the storm. The whole of the high girders, all 13 central spans, had torn loose in the gale and gone over into the Firth of Tay, and the train had gone down inside them, into 70 feet of black, freezing water. There was no rescue. There could not be. In that water, in that cold, in that dark, everyone in the train was already gone. In Dundee, the train stopped arriving. Men went down to the station, and then out toward the bridge in the storm, not yet believing what the wind was telling them. They crept out along the low southern spans as far as they dared, and there, in the middle of the Firth, the bridge simply stopped. The high girders were gone. The track ran out into empty air above the water. When morning came, the daylight showed the whole center of the longest bridge on Earth swept clean away, 13 spans of iron lying somewhere under the gray water, with the train and its people down among them. No one could say for certain how many had died, because no one knew exactly how many had boarded an ordinary Sunday train. They dragged the Firth for weeks. In the end, they recovered 46 bodies. 13 more were proved to have been aboard but were never found, carried out by the tide. The memorials on both banks named 59. At least 59 dead. Some counts ran to 75. The true number went into the Tay that night and never came back out. It is the confirmed toll of the disaster, and it is almost certainly too low. They did recover one thing whole. The locomotive was lifted from the riverbed, repaired, and put back into service, and ran for years. The men who worked it gave it a name. They called it the A court of inquiry sat for months. It took the bridge apart on paper and put its builders on the stand, and it reached a careful, damning conclusion. The bridge, it found, had fallen because the bracing and the fastenings were too weak to stand the force of the gale. It was badly designed, badly built, and badly maintained, all three at once. Bouch argued that a carriage had jumped the rails and struck the girders, that a derailment had knocked the bridge down. The engineers who examined the wreck found no evidence the carriages had left the line before the bridge broke. The bridge had failed first, and one of the three commissioners went further than the others. For the defects in the design, the construction, and the maintenance, he wrote, "Sir Thomas Bouch is, in our opinion, mainly to blame." It ended him. The bridge he had drawn across the Firth of Forth, already begun, was taken out of his hands and abandoned, and built later by other men to a different design. Thomas Bouch did not survive it long. Broken in health and in name, he died within the year, in the October after the bridge fell. But the lesson outlived him. From the wreck of the Tay Bridge came the rule that every British bridge must be designed to stand a wind far stronger than any Bouch had allowed for. Never again would an engineer be permitted to assume the wind would be kind. A second Tay Bridge was built beside the first, stronger, on 2 tracks, and it still carries trains across the Firth today. And beside it, out in the water, stand the stumps of the old one. The brick piers of Thomas Bouch's bridge, still there, in a line across the Tay, holding up nothing at all. A bridge is a promise made over deep water. It tells the people who cross it, "You are safe, I will hold." The Tay Bridge kept that promise for 18 months and broke it in a single gale in the dark because the man the whole country trusted had decided the wind was nothing to fear. At least 59 people went into the Tay that December night, and some of them are down there still, under the cold water, beside the iron that was meant to carry them home. Cold Wake is an autopsy of how proud things come apart. If the forgotten deserve a witness, subscribe. The next inquiry is already open.